And welcome back to episode number 38 of Raise the Banner podcast. It is your usual Macator here. Ben should be joining us shortly, but for now, it is WEI's John Lyons is here as a guest with us. John, how you doing today?
Doing well, Matt. I'm excited. My second appearance here with you guys. I had a
Yeah,
great time the first time around, so I'm looking forward to this one.
the first double two-time guest on the podcast.
Double
So
dipper. All right, first one.
yeah, I want to jump right into it. The Boston Celtics obviously took care of business last night over the Cleveland Cavaliers. While the Cleveland was a little bit of shorthanded, and the Celtics seemed to kind of have a little bit of an issue the last two games, kind of putting them away. What was your overall thoughts on the Cleveland series? And I know we don't know yet exactly who they're going to be facing, but what's your overall kind of feeling on this team right now?
So, look, overall, it's good. You zoom out from 10,000 feet. They've played 10 playoff games. They've won 8 of them. The 8 wins are by an average of 18 and a half points a game. That's really good. All right. So it's overall, the feeling is good. Now, the other side of it is, okay, it's good to get through the first 2 rounds, and you can't play in the conference finals without winning the first 2 rounds. But I think we know a team that went to the finals 2 years ago, the Eastern Conference Finals last year, added Porzingis, added Drew Holiday, added arguably the 2 best assistant coaches on the market in Charles Lee and Sam Cassell. That's a team that should be in the NBA Finals and should win the NBA Finals unless, look, if they catch a red-hot Denver team that's the defending champs in the finals and that's a close series they lose, I can probably accept that. But anything besides that, this team should be champions, right? And this, to me, this is a 2 to 3 year window. And I know Brown and Tatum are in their mid 20s. So for them, it could be a 10-year window. But with this group, you have Porzingis on a 3-year deal, making a lot of money. Holiday's in his mid 30s. Horford's in his late 30s. So, and obviously Tatum and Brown starting in the next couple of years are going to get really expensive. So with this particular group, you may only have a couple years, and then you might have to make a hard decision and trade, whether it's a Porzingis or a Holiday or one of those guys, just for the luxury tax repeater purposes, right? And then, of course, again, the luxury of having Tatum and Brown, it's much like, Cavs teams that had LeBron or the Warriors teams with Steph and Clay. You can just add other free agents and keep building. You're never going to be bad. But I'm just saying this iteration, I think it's a 2 to 3 year window right now. So this is an important year. And the other piece of it is, right, you face Miami with no Jimmy Butler, the Cavs without Jared Allen, and a hobbled Donovan Mitchell, which is great. And they took advantage of it, right? That's what you should do. Now take advantage of the next step in the Eastern Conference Finals. So I feel good from 10,000 feet, but the pressure is there. And I would say there's a couple little things that have come up the last couple games against Cleveland that I don't want to say I'm really worried about, but they had a 4-minute scoring drought in game 4 in the second half. They had a 5-minute scoring drought in game 5 in the second half. Their pick and roll defense was shaky. These are all things that can be corrected, but I think that's why this next, let's call it 5-6 days off, depending on when they actually play again, really valuable time to correct those things, because when you go against the Knicks or the Pacers in the Eastern Conference Finals, it's going to be a level up from what you saw in Cleveland and Miami.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit it on the head. I mean, they got through Cleveland relatively easily. They got through Miami relatively easily. You could kind of see, and I think it really kind of showed over the last 2 or 3 games that they need Porzingis more than I think that they would like to admit. And not that they're going to exactly be talking about that concept, but watching them play, uh, they, Mobley kind of played a lot better than what he really is as a player against them. And asking Horford to do as much as he has been doing the last few, I guess like 6 or 7 games. Without Porzingis, are they better or worse than what they were last year? So
Yeah.
you're basically Xing out Grant Williams, Michael Brogdon, and Marcus Smart, and you're adding Drew Holiday,
Yeah.
basically.
And Robert Williams as
So
well.
without Porzingis, they could be worse. Yeah, they're arguably worse than what they were last year without Porzingis. Now add Porzingis to the mix, and I think they're better than they were last year. So like that's been, I think, the biggest takeaway for me of watching these last, I guess, 6 or 7 games since Porzingis got hurt is that they need him. That being said, one thing I've noticed in going, trying to project this next series, whether it's versus Indiana or New York, is they really still shouldn't rush Porzingis back. I don't even want to see him game one. If they, if they lose game one, maybe if he's ready, okay, game two. But like I would take the Eastern Conference Finals with Porzingis in essentially game by game. If they go up 1-0 or 2-0 at home, I don't even want him out there for game three. But if they feel like they need him, all right, and he's ready there, they're just gonna be, for me, they need him for the finals. Like that's the big picture thing against whether it's Jokic or Karl Anthony Towns or Gobert, or Dallas doesn't exactly have like stellar big men, but they'll need him at that point. But that's been like where I've really been kind of focusing on is like, as you kind of said, we expect this at this point. We expect Eastern Conference Finals. I think that this has been the sixth time in the last 8 years that they've reached the
Yeah.
Eastern Conference Finals. So like, it's kind of at this point a little bit of what you do. Okay, you got here. What are you going to do with it? And they haven't gotten over the hump yet to win an NBA Finals. So it's really the question of, are you going to be that team that's just always a contender and never get there? Or are you going to show that you can finally do it? So that's kind of like the big question mark for me over these next few weeks, is that they're going to show it. And as we go, Benny Ball Games finally fixed his Wi-Fi.
Yeah, I had to call the AV guy at my office and be like, I have a personal matter that I need help with, and I had to like power reboot my computer because it whenever I would do like an internet troubleshoot, it was as if it was like, yeah, your computer doesn't have Wi-Fi. I can't look for networks. But apparently whatever I did worked, so here we are.
You could jump in right where we are, John. What are your thoughts on kind of all that with Porzingis and how they're going to shape up in the next series?
Well, your first point was an interesting one, right? Like without Porzingis, are they essentially the same team or worse or better than last year? Because you swap out Grant Williams and Robert Williams and Brogdon and Smart, and right now what you've gained is Drew Holiday, and I think another big piece is increased playing time for Derek White, right? He was a guy that was not part of their
Yeah.
main rotation last year because of Smart and Brogdon. So that I think is a great thing. But yeah, I mean, you're probably at the very least, you're probably a similar team to last year without Porzingis. And again, that's why you made the Porzingis trade. It's a difference maker. And I mentioned earlier, right, their struggles defending the pick and roll. Last year in Washington, Porzingis' last year there, he was fourth in the NBA in points allowed per pick and roll defended. Like he's really good at defending pick and rolls, and he was again this year. Like that's something that they need desperately. Also, like the scoring droughts they had and the turnover numbers, right? 15 turnovers in game 4, 14 in game 5. I think Porzingis solves a lot of those problems. Now, he doesn't make it all go away, but I think he solves a lot of those problems. And I think what we saw out of the Celtics these first 2 rounds is like I'm nitpicking a little, like, hey, yeah, the scoring droughts, you got to improve the ball movement a little bit, the turnovers, but that's things you're going to need in the NBA finals. But again, when you look at it, you take the team that just beat Cleveland in 5 games and played great defense outside of some of the pick and roll struggles, played great defense most of the time, especially in game 4, and you add Porzingis to it. Like, again, I think they're the best team in the NBA. If you add a healthy Porzingis to this mix, the only team that I would say could beat them in a series would be Denver. And I'd probably still pick the Celtics to win that series. I would just understand if Denver got them, considering all that Denver has, and they're the defending champs.
Yeah, Ben and I, talked about this the other day. He kind of expected, if there was no Porzingis, he would expect Denver to win.
Yeah.
And not to go back and what they would be without Porzingis. you kind of noticed it in the Cleveland series, even without Porzingis. That, and I said this to Ben last night after the game, was there ever really a point in last night's game where you felt like the game was genuinely in danger of being lost? And I kind of said, like, no. There was never really a point where I was like, I think they might actually lose. And they had a little bit of a lead, but even when, it was 48-48, and I remember I'm looking at the live betting line, and it's Celtics minus 10.5, and I'm like, holy shit. You're tied at basically, I think it was like a minute left in the half, and you got a 10.5 line. And so even into the third quarter and early fourth, where things were still pretty close, I was like, I'm never really that worried. And it was because it was obviously in part due to the injuries to Cleveland, is they were just immensely more talented than the players on the court for Cleveland. So when we talk about like when Porzingis comes back, Dallas is the only team that I look at. Excuse me, Dallas. Excuse me, Denver is the only team that I look at and really kind of say, with Porzingis, they could reasonably match up with the Boston Celtics. So that's kind of why, like, even if whether they face Indiana or New York, I don't even want to mess with bringing Porzingis back for Game 1. Unless you feel like you get yourself into a situation, maybe you split at home and you feel like you need him Game 3. Like, I'll take it game by game, and if they could be up 3-0 hypothetically against Indiana or New York, and then maybe I'd bring KP back just to get him a little bit of game, play under his belt for the finals. But I'm not forcing him back. If they don't need him for the next 2 or 3 games, just let him sit, get his calf 150%, and then maybe get him a little bit of a run under his legs so he's ready for the finals.
Yeah, and that's like the delicate balance, right? Because you want this dude 100%. He changes your whole offense. He changes what you
Completely.
do defensively. But at the same time, do you want his first game action to be game 1 of the NBA Finals against Denver? Like, that's tough to, right?
No,
That's the delicate
exactly.
balance, right? So, but if you put him out there up 3-0 and he re-aggravates the injury, like, it's tough. And that's where, to me, this is where Joe Mazzulla is on the spot. And I think Joe Mazzulla's done a pretty good job managing their rotations, especially once Porzingis went down, managing Horford's minutes so they weren't too over the top, and playing Cornette as much as he could. So I think he's done a pretty good job with that. And as KP works his way back, I think that's another thing that's going to be on Mazzulla, because you want that offense to be flowing as well as possible. I mean, you guys remember middle of the season, early of the season, even times late in the season, when he was healthy and in there and that offense was really flowing, they were unstoppable. And that's what you want to head into the finals too. I mean, this is a team, they're the number 1 offensive rating and number 1 net rating in the league for a reason, right? So that's the delicate balance. So I agree with you, Matt. Like, unless he's 100% healthy, I'm not playing him in Game 1. Probably not playing him in Game 2. And again, if he's 100% healthy, fine, play him. Otherwise, I don't play him until either you get down in the series, or, like you said, if it's 3-0 or 3-1 and you just want to make sure you can work him in so things look a little more crisp
Yeah,
for
10,
Game 1 of the
15
finals.
minutes, Game
Yeah.
4, just to kind of get his legs so he's kind of ready for the finals. Yeah, I mean that's kind of where I'm at with the whole situation. I don't really see a scenario where I would play him Game 1. And from what we've heard, it kind of seems like he could be ready for Game 1, especially if uh, Indiana and New York go to 7 games.
Yeah.
But like, I still wouldn't. And if they happen to go down 0-1, then maybe you bring them back Game 2. But until then, I'm taking it game by game and just holding them out until I either feel like I want to get him a couple minutes to get ready to the finals, or we need him to win this series. Ben, where are you at with all kind of the whole Celtics vibe right now in Porzingis?
I mean, you guys are kind of hit it on the head so far. I mean, there's really no incentive to rush KP back, unless it becomes, I mean, like you guys said, if it's dire needs, it's, you'd rather have 80% of Porzingis to either win a Game 7 or extend a series in an elimination game. At least at that point, it's, you're pushing all your chips into the center, right? It's win or go home at this point. But yeah, I mean, it makes no sense to rush him back. If if you want to rotate him in, whether it's, if he's ready to go and you're up late in the game and you kind of just want to ease him in, it makes total sense. I just think that the long-term title chances that this team has, I hate to say it like this, it doesn't hinge on Porzingis, but he is a massive piece to this offense, and you saw it in Cleveland. There were certain guys that, if Porzingis is fully healthy and he's in there, like, guys like Mobley are not going to drop 30 points on you in game 5. Like, that is not happening if Porzingis is healthy. And I think that they looked at it and said that they just felt so much more talented than Cleveland that they didn't, there was no need for KP to be part of that. Like you said, Matt, the game never really felt like it was out of hand or that it was in danger of being a loss last night. It's just tough. It's, maybe I'm a little too, hard on a team like the Celtics because they're so talented. When they don't have, they didn't have LeVert last night. They haven't had Jared Allen all series. Donovan Mitchell's missing his second game in a row. Like, that's a game that's like, okay, like, just take it to them and just have a good game, first tip to final whistle, and just don't mess around. Put them away. Don't let them hang around. That's a team that, if you let them hang around, crazy things can happen, right? But they're moving on. They're resting. The earliest we're going to see New York is Sunday. The earliest we'd see Indiana, or the latest we'd see either team would be Tuesday. So rest them up, get them healthy. But yeah, unless Porzingis says he's fully ready to go, and the doctor's like, yeah, like, he's ready to go, there's really no need to force the issue.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for me,
go ahead, John.
all right. And I think to your guys' points about what he brings offensively, I think there's 2 games you can look at as clear examples, right? Late January, they play the Clippers, and then game 2 against Cleveland. Both of those games, Porzingis was out. The Celtics weren't hitting their threes, and they just couldn't do anything offensively. In both games, they got blown out. So I think that's the issue, right? This Celtics team without Porzingis, if they hit their threes, I think they can still beat pretty much any team except Denver. The difference is, if you're going to win an NBA championship, you're going to have to win a game or two in either the East Finals or the NBA Finals where you don't hit threes, right? You have to win a game that you have an off shooting night. And I think that's what he can really bring to the table beyond his actual hitting of threes himself. His ability to get buckets when everyone around him is missing threes makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And defensively, just to kind of piggyback off of that, if they, let's just say they match up and they get Denver in the NBA Finals, which is kind of what it's looking like. They've turned that series around against Minnesota. If he's not ready to go, like, Djokovic is going to get his. Like, there's almost no stopping him. But if you don't have
with or without KP, there's not much stopping.
He's the best
him.
player in the NBA.
Yeah,
just kind of limiting him as much as you can.
Yeah. I feel like with him, like, not to go too much on a tangent, I think, like, we're with him where we were with, like, LeBron 10 years ago, where you could just hand Djokovic the MVP every year and nobody would care. Jokic.
LeBron.
I kept saying Djokovic.
Oh, yeah.
He plays tennis. Nikola Jokic. You could just hand him the MVP every year because he's that good. So yeah, there's no, you're just going to limit him. You're not going to silence him. You're not shutting him down. You're not going to hold him to, 13 points and 7 rebounds on 30% shooting. Like, that's not what you're going to do. But I think defensively with Porzingis is, he's not, obviously the old school big man doesn't exist, but with him down there, that's at least something that can slow Jokic down to a point where, you can get into your offensive sets the other side and you can run things through the big 3. I think that, not that we were, but I don't think that we can discount the defensive aspect, because nobody else on this team, no disrespect to Horford, he had a hell of a game 5 last night. And no one is slowing down Jokic, even with KP. But if KP's not on the floor, that spells danger, considering how good he is.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people. I remember when he was coming here, when the trade happened. The talk was like, he's not that good defensively. He's just an injury-prone offensive guy. He showed, when he was healthy this year, and other than maybe 1 or 2 smaller injuries, his missing games were more like them just resting him, and getting him ready for the playoffs. He showed that, like, he's a pretty good defender. And like you said, like, his length alone makes a huge difference inside. I know, Ben, you were blowing up my phone screaming about Luke Cornett last night, watching him play against Mobley.
Yeah,
I was a
that
little
was
bit disappointed that they weren't giving Tillman some run the way Mobley was kind of putting it on Cornett. Cornett's, I think, a little bit more rounded of a player, but Tillman brings a little bit more physicality that I was hoping that they would give him at least a few minutes last night to kind of disrupt Mobley. But they as a whole, if Porzingis, and the good news is Porzingis should 100% be ready for the finals. If they make it that far, but if he happens to re-aggravate the injury or for whatever reason have a setback and not be ready, if they face Denver, they're in for an uphill battle because they have no one that could realistically slow down Jokic. And that's kind of the big worry. And I think it's the one flaw on this team is they don't have and it's no disrespect to Horford. Like I love the guy. He had a vintage Al Horford game last night. It was awesome to see. But like it's tough to ask him to do that for 35, 40 minutes a game anymore. He's just not at that level to do that on a consistent basis. So it's that if that's going to be if the Celtics fail and don't win a finals, it's probably because they get beat out by Denver or hell, like I mean, even if they went on to face like Minnesota and Minnesota upsets Denver, they got two big men that can score the basketball too. It's because they're big. Like Porzingis got hurt. If Porzingis is back, I just I struggle to see a team that beats them in a 7-game series. Denver will be the closest, but a healthy Porzingis, I'm still taking the Celtics in probably 6 games. But one other topic, and it reminded me, Ben, is I wanted to bring this up and see John's thought. Is last week, I think was it Maz that brought this up on 98.5? He talked about
yes.
the concept of basically the competition that the Celtics have been facing. If this would be a less gratifying championship because they didn't face like a gauntlet of the Eastern Conference. And John, I kind of want to get your thoughts on that, like, and how as a whole, if they go through, let's just say New York and they beat New York in 5 games, and then they faced, I don't know, Dallas and beat them in 5 or 6 games, are you going to be looking at this championship any bit differently than if they had gone through, let's say, like a healthy Milwaukee or a healthy Miami, and then they went through Denver in the finals? Are you going to be looking at it any bit differently?
Yeah, well, first of all, if they beat Dallas and Kyrie and Luca, that would be awesome for me personally. I would love that. But look,
Yeah.
I got to be honest with you guys. They win the NBA Finals. I don't think the parade is any less fun, right? For who you beat.
Yeah.
And look, here's the thing. A lot of folks, and this is going to sound like a slight against Denver, and it's really not. A lot of people out there, they worship at the altar of the Denver Nuggets. But Denver played 3 play-in teams last year, including one in the finals in Miami to win a championship. Like, we don't take that
Yeah.
away from them. You know what I mean? There's
No,
been
not
other
at all.
teams. Like, I know the one that's been big on Twitter. People talk about how the 87 Lakers beat a team with a losing record in the conference finals. Like, there's been like, I don't know. Do I think Magic and Kareem weren't as good? Like, I don't. I think the only time that ever enters a discussion is if you start comparing like all-time teams. So like if you wanted to let's say the Celtics win a title this year and you wanted to compare them to the '08 Celtics. Well, maybe I'd take the '08 Celtics because they beat LeBron, they beat that Pistons team, they beat Kobe and Gasol. That's the only time that comes in. But as far as the individual championship, I think that's ludicrous, right? I mean, you win it. There's one team that wins a championship. So if you're that team that wins a championship, you won the championship and that's it, right? So I just think, be like to say that it wouldn't mean as much, especially, by the way, that it would be this group's first one after all the struggles they've had in losing playoff series. I think that's ludicrous to say it would mean less. Again, the only time I think that comes in is if you're just comparing all-time teams and you give one team an edge because the '08 Celtics had a tougher Eastern Conference road than the '24 Celtics. Fine, right? That's okay. Or you can say the 98 Bulls had a tougher road than the 99 Spurs. I don't know. Whatever example you want to use. That's the only time it comes in. But as far as like, does it make a championship less important? Like, hey, I got a ton of respect for Maz. I think he knew what he was doing on that one. He was getting it. He got us to talk about it. So I give him credit, right?
Yeah, that's my biggest thing with Felger and Maz is I they make headlines, they do their job and to an extent, but it drives me nuts with some of the out of left field comments that they make. But I mean, it gets us to talk about it.
Right. And I think if you look at the Celtics path, because New York and Indiana are probably New York's probably not going to be full strength. Indiana's young, but Tyrese Halliburton's an all NBA level player. That's a good team. New York is a really good team. Jalen Brunson's probably an all NBA level player. That's still a really good team. In the West, I mean, look, we talk about Denver. Minnesota is an awesome team. Oklahoma City is an awesome team. And even Dallas, which I think is the weakest of the teams left in the West, they have a lead on OKC right now. And Kyrie, listen, I hate Kyrie from his time in Boston. Dude is an NBA champion, and he is an elite player when he's out there. Luka is an all NBA MVP candidate player. So no matter what, okay, Jimmy Butler wasn't there in the first round. I accept that. That's true, right? But you also won in 5 games. Now, if they had kicked around and 1 in 7, okay, then that's a problem. But they won in 5. Same thing against Cleveland. So to me, I just think that's pretty ludicrous. And the only time that comes in is if you're comparing all-time teams.
And I think from a fan perspective, it's certainly cooler when you beat a team like the Lakers in the finals.
Sure.
But no, it doesn't. To me, it doesn't change the overall satisfaction that we are hoisting the trophy at the end. We won the last game. Nobody else is the champion. You can't take that away. Is it cooler that it was the Lakers versus if it's Dallas? Sure. But I think that's bar talk with your buddies having a couple of beers. Oh yeah, it was cool. We beat the Lakers. Or, well, yeah, we didn't beat anybody cool, but hey, we won the championship. Nobody can take that away. That's really where that conversation ends for me in terms of the gratification piece about who they beat along the way and who they beat for a title.
Yeah, I said it to you, Ben, that they it's not the perfect comparison, but when you run a 5K and you finish 5K, you feel mildly accomplished. If you ran a marathon, you would feel really accomplished. In the end, if that's your objective and you completed it, you're going to feel accomplished. And it's not perfect because in the end, an NBA Finals is an NBA Finals. And sure, if you went through the gauntlet, the journey of the final title feels slightly different. But and I said this to you, Ben, the kind of the angle that Maz was pushing at the time was the Celtics are so good that it's not gratifying because they're too good. So if they push their way through the East with, say they beat New York in 5 games, and then they run through Dallas, let's say, in 5 or 6 games, a title's still a title. It's not you're basically just nitpicking that the Celtics were too good, and therefore the title is kind of less gratifying, which is kind of mind-boggling to me.
Maybe a closer comparison. Go back to the 07 Pats, right? Now I know at the end of the year, I think it was the final 5 or 6 games of the regular season were, battles. They were 1-possession games at the end of the year, and of course they didn't win at all. But if the Pats had gone 19-0 and dominated every game, would it be less gratifying because they were just so much better than everybody else on the way to a title? No. Absolutely not. It's just you can't fault a team for their talent. It's just that it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? If they don't, with the talent they have, if the Celtics don't go out and dominate, it's oh, well, why are they not out there dominating like they should? But if they do dominate, it's oh, well, it was just too easy for them. So maybe next year they'll have a challenge. It's just finding something to kind of complain about. And just,
which is that radio show.
Benny, though, you got me thinking too, the modern dynasty in the NBA right now is the Warriors. Their first title against Cleveland, Kevin Love missed that whole series. Kyrie Irving got hurt in game 2, didn't play the rest of the series. I mean, that was LeBron and Matt Dellavedova against the Warriors. I don't know. I don't look at them any differently or that title any differently. Like, yeah, they got a good break with those 2 injuries, but they took it like good teams take advantage of that stuff. Like
Right.
if if the Celtics were messing around like last year, the Celtics played the Hawks. DeJounte Murray didn't play in game 5. Celtics still lost. Like, that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
Joel Embiid didn't play in game 1 last year and they lost. Like, that's a problem. Winning in 5 games against 2 teams you're a lot better than, like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to find a problem with that.
Especially when it felt like in both, maybe more so in the Miami series than the Cleveland series. Like in game 2 against Miami, like Miami, and I forget what the spread was, it 8 points they won by, something like that, and they were just out of their minds shooting the ball on the floor. Like it took their best shooting day to win,
In franchise history, I think. Yeah.
yeah, to win a pretty close game on the road. Like if they don't shoot lights out that game, like they get swept.
Yeah, they shot
If
53% from deep.
Yeah.
if Marcus Morris doesn't hit every 3 he just throws up at the basket last night, the Celtics win by 30, not by 15.
Yeah, and even when he did, the Celtics, like, again, we talked about just the overall talent comparison of Cleveland and Boston, and it kind of showed in that fourth quarter where the Boston Celtics ended up just being too much for them. But
Yeah.
no, that's kind of where it stands for me. Is just like a title is going to be a title, and just because the Celtics are, in my opinion, significantly better than any team in the East, and really the only team that matches up semi-close to me is Denver with a healthy Porzingis. To me, it's like you're basically faulting them for Brad Stevens putting together too good of a team, and kind of like John, like you said, like
Yeah.
no one's going to look back if Boston goes on to beat New York in 5 games, in Denver or Dallas or Minnesota or OKC in 5 or 6 games. No one's going to look back 10 years from now and say, well, Boston won the championship, but they had an easy schedule. Like no one looks back at the first Warriors championship and says that.
Right.
So it's like, all right, like in the end, like a title's a title, and I'm going to be happy, and you're going to treat it like a title. The banner's going to be up in the rafters the same way the 08 title is going to be.
I'm going to have a new hat to wear that's going to say champs on it, right? So it's going to be, exactly, right? Like that's the way it's still going to, I don't buy into that at all.
All right, perfect. All right, John, I know you're going to jump off now. I appreciate you coming on. We'll make you the first 3-peat guest.
Maybe maybe in 5 or 6 weeks we'll be talking about an NBA championship. All right.
Yep.
And then of course it'll be time for Patriots mini camp too, but I don't think we'll be talking about championship with that. A little bit of a different conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
But always appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, John. Have a great night.
Of course, John. All right, take care. Thanks. All right, that was John Lyons of WEI. I appreciate him coming on. That was some good Celtics talk. Obviously, we've kind of been pushing them down the road of getting into the conversation of the Boston Celtics lately. But that was some good 33 minutes. I just kicked the trash can underneath my desk.
I was going to guess there were some pans rattling around in the kitchen.
No. But yeah, no, that kind of what we talked about. That like they're just more talented than every team. So it's right now it's get a healthy Porzingis back and just kind of it's everything's in front of them. There should be nothing in front of them that stops them, even with especially with the healthy Porzingis. But
yep,
I do want to transition. We haven't talked about the Boston Red Sox too much really recently. They're kind of, I would say, doing exactly what we expected overall, except it's the complete opposite of how we expected them to get it there.
Yes, we expected
going
them
into the season.
We expected them to slug their way to a 500 record, not outpitch everybody.
Yeah, going into the season, we were like, all right, like they're going to have a pretty good lineup. The rotation's going to be mediocre. The bullpen's going to have to carry them. And we're going to be, in mid-May talking about this 500 team that like has no pitching and blah, 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 blah. It is the complete opposite. The absolute, unequivocal, complete opposite of what we've seen in the last first 6 or 7 weeks of the season. The lineup has been pummeled by injuries. Trevor Story went down. He's out for what seems to be the season, most likely at least till I would say August or September. Maybe that's a window where he can come back. Tristan Cassis said today that he's aiming for to be eligible in back when he's first eligible on June 21st. Um, Outside of that, they've been punched in the face in the rotation with injuries to Whitlock, Pavetta. I know Crawford dealt with a little bit of Bello was out for, I think he missed 2 or 3 starts. And yet this rotation, it does not matter who goes up there, whether it's Bello, Cooper Criswell, Chase Anderson, Bernardino, it doesn't matter. It's become to the point where it's just flat out baffling to me that they continue game in and game out to put out an impressive showing on, on the mound. So I mean that's kind of where I wanted to start is where are you with this rotation and what's is Andrew Bailey really that much of a goddamn wizard, or was Dave Bush, Dave Bush, I think is
Dave,
Dave, I think,
Dave
yeah,
Bush.
Dave Bush, was he that bad? Like what is going on from last year to this year, in your opinion, that has just completely transformed this starting rotation?
So I think the politician's answer is I think it's a little bit of A, a little bit of B. But I think the easy answer for me is the philosophy change in pitching. We can talk about whether the injuries to the staff are connected in some way, shape, or form. Maybe we'll do that another day. But the pitching staff as a whole is very much more of a breaking ball heavy staff this year versus last year. That's due to an analytical approach. Obviously, the highest exit velos come on fastballs, and the lowest exit velos come on off-speed pitches with as much horizontal and vertical break and spin rate as possible, right? So I think that's a testament to Andrew Bailey. And, I'm not going to say that, Dave Bush was bad, but maybe just based on, the modern MLB, the philosophy change, I think, has certainly had a pretty solid impact. Looking at their overall pitching stats, we can kind of go down the line. The Red Sox currently have the number 1 ERA in all of baseball at 2.74 team ERA. One of only 2 staffs that are below 3. The Yankees are in second place at a 2.91 team ERA. Other things, they lead baseball in shutouts with 6. They're, it's bullpen is, kind of hit or miss, at this point in the year with save opportunities and saves. But, they're throwing a ton of innings. They are they're top half of baseball, I think, in innings pitched. So I think, philosophy change with Andrew Bailey certainly has helped. They're not, I can look it up right now. I just want to see. So like strikeout wise, they are 17th in strikeouts with 366. So middle of the pack for sure. They're not striking out guys at an elite level, but obviously the breaking stuff has generated weaker contact. Obviously not giving up as many runs. So that's more of a philosophy thing that tips the scales in Andrew Bailey's favor. It's just nice to see that everyone seems to have bought in, despite the fact that they've been riddled with injuries. I know Pavetta just came back, and they were bitten by the injury bug hard early in the year, but they certainly weathered the storm. They sit one game one game over 500 at 21 and 22, third in the division, and I think pitching has a lot to do with that. And I think that's one of the reasons they're 500. If you look at their offensive stats, I was doing that while you were kind of breaking into the whole Red Sox segment. They're essentially a middle of the road offensive team at this point in the year. So if their pitching staff is not arguably, you want to take the big picture and call them a top 10 overall pitching staff in baseball, top 5 overall pitching staff in baseball, they'd be in a lot worse of a situation, I think, just because the offense, hasn't really put it together the way we thought it would. It's nice they're treading water, and hopefully things can turn around offensively. But things are obviously looking good, and I think the philosophy change from Andrew Bailey and Craig Breslow has had a lot to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of general sense of how I've understood Bailey's approach is pretty simple, and it's batters are worst against breaking balls, so we're gonna throw more breaking balls. I mean, like in a vacuum, like that's the way I kind of think of it. In the big picture, like that's kind of the best way to sum it up. And you and I have gone off the record back and forth of like, is this maybe contributing to more injuries and all that? And that's a whole different discussion. But for what it is, it's one of those things that you sit there and think of and say, huh, like that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It kind of makes a lot of sense. If batters are not as good against breaking balls, why are we throwing more pitches that they're better against?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of one of those things because when you're taught growing up, and especially because when you're very young, you can't even throw off-speed pitches in your first few years of little league and stuff like that. But when you work your way up as a kid and into high school and stuff like that, it's ingrained in your head. Fastball is your pitch one. Like that is your pitch, and you work off your fastball with breaking balls. And Bailey's essentially saying no. And it's a little bit different with every pitcher, depending on what their best pitches are and how each team is against certain pitches. But for example, like Nick Pivetta, he's got a filthy curveball. So Bailey's basically sitting back and saying, why are you throwing this pitch 20% of the time? It's your best pitch. Players don't hit it well. You're going to throw it 30 to 35, maybe 40% of the time. And again, it makes you sit back and say, what? Because you're not used to it, but yet it works. So it's
Right.
one of those situations where first of all, I'm interested to see if we see other pitching coaches and other teams adopt this kind of approach as a whole. But at the same time, it is one of the most baffling, like simple yet genius approaches that I've seen from a pitching coach. And again, we'll see if arms hold up with you're throwing curveballs, you're increasing spin rate, increasing the whip on your arm, and it could have a negative effect, I guess, in the long term and maybe injuries. But in a vacuum of how things worked out, it's fascinating. For the first, and I'm finally kind of getting into the spot where I expect it. For the first month or so of the season, every time like Houck or Whitlock or Pavetta or Bello or Criswell or Crawford went up to the on the mound, I'm like, they got to blow up this time, right? It was a fluke the first two times through the lineup, or three times through the rotation, or four times, and it's finally getting to the point where it's like, this is the norm for them. And so it's just kind of been all around baffling for me. It's just mind blowing that we went into this season thinking that no one expected this from them, and yet the rotation has been the anchor to this team. And like you kind of mentioned it, what do you say their team rotation is right now? Was it it's 245, I want to say it is.
The ERA?
In terms of yeah.
Two.
In terms of rotation.
So team ERA is 273.
273. All right. I mean, that's still. Do you know where that ranks? I think it's top.
Yeah,
5, right?
It's number one in baseball.
Oh, it's number one. For some reason I thought it was slightly less, but yeah,
No. Maybe
kind
like
of there you go.
maybe their starter ERA, their team ERA is 2.73. I don't know if I'm on MLB's website. It doesn't break it down to like starter versus oh, here we go. I can do it right here. So starter ERA is 2.54, which is number one in baseball. The Phillies are second at 2.60, and then the Cubs are third at 3.09. If you go to bullpen, they're fifth in baseball, 3.06 ERA.
Yeah, so the rotation's been even better. So it might be like closer to like 2.45, 2.5 for as a starting rotation, which is just
So
absolutely baffling.
the starting the rotation ERA is 2.54.
Yeah, all right. So there you go. 2.54. I mean, it's getting to the point where it's just like mind-boggling how that they've been able to keep this up, and whether do you expect it to stay like this through the rest of the season? To maybe not 2.54, but like if I said what will the Red Sox rotation ERA be in on August 1st, what would you predict at this point?
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, what's interesting is ERA seems to be down like league wide. And there's multiple things that can contribute to that. I think home plate umpires are just downright atrocious, but not a story for another day. But to put it in perspective, the San Diego Padres starters led baseball in ERA last year at 3.69. So their starter ERA at the best in baseball was more than a run worse than what the Red Sox are right now. Now I know we're 6-7 weeks into the season, not a full season, but right now, let's see. Last year, 7 teams had a team starter ERA under 4. This year, it's 14, and the 15th team is at 4.06. So it seems that starter ERAs are down league wide compared to last season. I mean, it's tough to predict, right? I mean, you figure when you get into the warmer months, June, July, August, balls are going to start flying all over the place. They always do. I mean, I would imagine, it's obviously unrealistic to think that they're going to, they'll have a sub-3 ERA for the entire season. Do I think it would be better than the Padres last year? Like, do I think we're going to see numbers better than that lead baseball? Probably. I mean, hard to say, what to expect, but I mean, like you said, we've just been kind of waiting for them to slip up and kind of revert back to what we thought they were going to, and they just haven't done it yet. They're going to have bad nights. Everyone has bad nights. Even the best pitchers. Clayton Kershaw didn't go out and dominate every single start 33 times a year. He slipped up every once in a while too. So, it's bound to happen. I think this is a little bit unsustainable. Do I think they could be, at the end of the year, a run worse in starter ERA? Sure, but if your team ERA for starters is 3.5, that's pretty fantastic for an entire season.
Yeah, and again, I wouldn't expect them to sit at 2.74 or whatever it was right now. But if they, I think as we'll see as the season progresses, excuse me, as Casas gets back ideally, in late June, Grissom ideally gets his feet under him and starts to play a little bit better. You'll kind of see the differential between the offense and defense, offense and pitching balance out a little bit more. Where I think you'll see the pitching kind of push maybe into the low 3 ERAs, and then the lineup to improve. But as a whole, I mean, like this is, I would say slightly better, or maybe right about where I think we kind of expected them as a team. I know you were less optimistic than me, and felt like maybe they might be a below 72 win season. Right now they're 22-21, which basically you would say on pace would be about an 82-win, 83-win season, which would put them above what they were last year. And I would say you would be in the mix at the deadline, to possibly be a contender. And I was on my way home about an hour and a half ago, and they were talking about this on the baseball hour. Do you like? Let's say the Red Sox are a game. Basically, let's say they are where they were last year, which was at the deadline a game out from the playoffs. I think they were a game behind Toronto last year on August 1st. Um, what is your expectations at that point? Do you think that they would be buyers, or do you think that they would be sellers again at the deadline? Or not that they were really big sellers um, at all last year, but if they're a game back in the offseason at the deadline, August 1st comes around. What's your kind of current expectations of what they would be?
It's hard to say because obviously, new GM doesn't really seem like the offensive philosophy is the same, is different, but we'll see. I mean, I would kind of try to be like a mix of both, kind of by, addition by subtraction, subtraction by addition type of thing, similar to what they did under Bloom. I'm not sure if you
You
heard
there?
what I. Yeah, I'm still here. Sorry. I wasn't sure if you'd heard what I said about like philosophy and stuff. Sorry, my dog needed to get out of the office. So the thing with the like my hope, I guess is where I'll go with this is my hope is that if they're within striking distance, the playoffs, I guess, right? If they're within striking distance, I would like them to buy. I don't want them to like go full Dombrowski type buying. That's a little crazy because the belief of the organization is that they're still waiting on the young guys, which is next year. Mayer, Anthony, Teal, so on and so forth, right? So I don't think my expectation would be that they would buy or sell. I think you could see a little bit of like what was happening under Bloom, buy here, sell there, because they're trying to still build the team for when those three guys are ready to step up and be part of the major league roster, and then now they have their young core they can go build around. That's kind of where I'm at with that. I wouldn't be surprised one way or the other. It's hard to have an expectation with a new GM, and especially with how things have gone over the last few, things went under Bloom, but that's kind of what I would expect them to do.
Yeah, I mean it's tough to predict exactly because this is a new regime, so it's not like basing it off previous years with Bloom and all that. Um, the big picture is that they're, I want to say, about 7 or 8 million below the luxury tax, and so I really wouldn't expect them to go over that. So even
No, I
if
would expect them to. I would
they're
expect
in a
them to stay
position
under
where they
too.
could realistically buy, their option is going to be limited. And so not just you can basically still go buy any player, but you're likely going to need to give up a little bit extra to get the team to pay for the salary. In other words, not go over the luxury tax. So they could hypothetically still buy any player they want it within reason at the deadline, even if they don't want to go over the tax. But realistically, it hampers a little bit of an expectations. So when we talk about what this team needs as it currently stands, we'll see where things are with the rotation. At the time, it's tough to kind of like still buy into whether they're not going to need an arm at the deadline.
I
But
mean, you could never need enough pitching, so
they're
you kind of hope that that's what they do. That if they're going to add, they want to add to pitching and
correct.
add guys that'll help continue to mold the philosophy that they're trying to build.
Yeah, I'm more just saying, like, last year, like, it was clear, like, they needed an arm. Like, they needed pitching. Like, this year, if the deadline was today, like, I'm not sure I'm targeting pitching. I don't think, like, I feel like I'm not targeting
Yeah,
pitching, I'm targeting another bat in the lineup to try to get this offense going and kinda bring some life to this offense. And again, we know it's like, Story got injured and Costas got injured and Grissom was out and all that. But, like, I feel like if the deadline was today, I would be looking for a right-handed bat to add to that lineup more than pitching.
yeah. I mean, I wouldn't close the door to pitching, but yeah, it certainly wouldn't be the area I would emphasize and harp on.
Yeah, so, I mean, like, again, what expectations for the team if the deadline was today, I don't know. It's really hard to justify arguing either side because we don't know what to expect from Breslow. I would just say going into this, unless they go on a high, deep run where they're in a very good position come mid-August or early August, excuse me, I have 0 expectations that they're gonna go over the tax, and really, I don't want them to in a big picture unless I don't know, unless Costas comes back and they're in a phenomenal spot to kinda go all in this year. But I would like for a variety of different reasons, everything's about the future with this roster. And we've talked about Teal and Roman Anthony and Mayer and all that. One name that is slowly trickling up boards, and I think everybody will get to know him pretty soon is Tristan, not Tristan, Christian Campbell. Um, he's in high A right now. He's starting to light it up. He was a second or third round pick, I think, Clash in 2022 by Heim Bloom. As usual, he was a another middle infielder. Not that we have enough of those on the team already, but he's been lighting it up. There, I mean, the way I'm seeing the minor league system right now is it seems like they'll be ready by early to mid 2025. We could maybe see some of them up. But until then, like, I just don't have a big expectation that they're gonna overly invest in this club. And we're us as fans are annoyed by that because we there's no logical excuse to not invest. And I know that's a very blinded kind of viewpoint because we don't see the details of like Fenway Sports Group and all that, blah 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 blah. But like in terms of expectations, I still don't have really much expectations for the remainder of the season. I mean, has anything changed for you in terms of what you expect from this team over the next, 5 months?
I mean, a little bit. I didn't think the pitching would be this good. I would expect the offense, to continue to improve as long as they're staying healthy. I would say, I would be more surprised if they started to kind of trend and spiral downward. I mean, I haven't looked at the schedule, right? So, not sure what they got coming up. I know that they got the Rays right now. But, I would say, the hope is that they, can be, on a 85 to 90 win pace. I think is a fair expectation if the offense can turn things around. I think that's a little bit more realistic than if they trended in the other direction and they start, trending more towards like a 70 to a 75 win pace. They're kind of smack dab somewhere right in the middle of that, closer to 85 than 70, right? But, if the offense can turn things around, it certainly allows for the pitchers can obviously throw with more confidence and the margin for error becomes greater, because if you score more runs a game, then your pitchers don't have to be quite as good because your offense is scoring, right? But, I'd like to think that, if they're really overachieving and they're trending more towards like 85 to 90 wins, that they might be a little bit more apt to add pieces that are good for the now that doesn't sacrifice, next year and beyond. But, as long as they keep winning baseball games and they're staying in it, then, you know, it'll be nice to have meaningful games in, end of August, September, which we haven't had in quite a while. So I expect them to, remain competitive, and if the offense can pick it up a little bit. Again, not that they've been bad; they're league average, but if they can creep into that top 10, top 8 range, then I think they could legitimately threaten for a wild card spot.
Yeah, I mean, big picture, like I'm cautiously still very optimistic about the long-term overview of this team, and that's even with the lack of commitment from ownership. And I say that because I genuinely believe in this farm system, and I genuinely believe that in 2 years, this lineup, and there's no room for everybody, but in 2 years, this lineup could be unbelievable. Unbelievable if things play out. So, just playing, I guess, the hypothetical of 2 years from now, it's the start of the 2026 season. You could see a scenario where it's, Roman Anthony in left field, Rafaela in center, Abreu in left. I don't know what happens with Duran, or you could see Duran in left and Roman Anthony in right, and maybe Abreu's gone. And then you'll have Devers at third. You'll have Mayer at short. You could have anywhere between Grissom, Nick York, Trevor Story will technically still be under contract. You could have Christian Campbell, you Chase Meadroth. You could have a variety of options at second base. You'll have Tristan Casas at first base, and then you'll have Christian Wong, Connor Wong, and Kyle Teal probably basically dual taking the catching duties. And you look at that lineup, and while it's left-handed heavy, that has a chance to be a loaded offensive team. And so we'll see where things play out, because Yoshida's under contract for another 3 more years be after this season, and Trevor Story's technically under contract for
3.
I think 3 more years. I think he could technically opt out after year 4, but he's not going to at this rate. And so he's probably here for another 3 more years after this. And so you look at all these pieces and how they're going to line up, and I guess maybe that's kind of my questions, but what's your early prediction of, if you look at 2026, what would be your most likely prediction of what the 3 outfield spots look like?
I mean, I think 2 are pretty easily. It's Rafaela and Roman Anthony. And then it just becomes a question mark of what you do with Abreu, Duran. I think Duran is more likely to still be here, and Abreu's gone. I mean, that's as long as everything pans out, I think that's kind of that's the easy answer. It would be Duran, Rafaela, and Anthony. I think there's a slight question mark over whether Devers is still at third base in 2 years. I know that Yoshida's still under contract, so they've got a DH issue, especially if Devers is not suitable to play defensively at third base, excuse me. But yeah, I mean, outfield wise, I think it's those 3 that makes the most sense. And yeah, I mean, to your point, if those 3 guys become what we think they are, because I would expect them to be up next year, and 2026 is kind of the year offensively. Then
speaking of that, Devers just hit a ding dong.
Oh, nice. And Cooper Criswell was on pitching Ninja about 10 minutes ago. For 2 strikeouts in the first. He had a cutter that started in the middle of the plate and ended up off the plate inside to a lefty. So I'm sure there was, 17 inches of glove side run on that one. But having said that, I think 2026 is kind of the year we expect them to be like really relevant, really challenging. They have I think obviously they can still improve on the rotation, but I mean, the potential of this offense is very, very high, especially if the 3 guys that we're waiting on become what we think or are close to what we think they could be.
Yeah, and just because you brought it up, I would say what we've seen from Devers so far this year has been notably better so far than what we saw last year, especially defensively. He was a little banged up earlier on the season, and not that he has been like stellar defensively or even good defensively, but he has been average defensively this year. I think he's probably hovering right around, even money for his defensive WAR. I think his OAA on Baseball Savant is a little bit lower in the 20s for percentile. But like, if he just stays at that level, we can deal with that
Yeah.
as long as he is
So
like serviceable defensively.
so as it stands right now, his offensive WAR is a 6.6 and his defensive WAR is a negative 0.4, which
Negative point,
so as of right now,
a little bit below.
only 32 games into the season, that would be the third best defensive WAR of his career. Single season record for WAR was in 2019. His defensive WAR was a 13.6. And he's been negative three out of the 4 years since then.
Yeah, and so I don't even expect. What was his WAR last year defensively
Negative
as a
four
whole?
point negative 4.2 defensive WAR.
Yeah, so if he can just hover around -1, -1.5 even, like, his bat makes it worth it. He's been great this year with his bat. It
Yeah,
has really come alive over the last few years. None of us
yeah,
expect him to be a Gold Glove third baseman. He just
no,
needs to be serviceable at the spot and
yeah,
not be a
and
complete utter liability at the position.
exactly. So COVID year aside, talk about offensive WAR. He's had 3 out of the last 4 years. His offensive WAR has been at least 26. It was a 15 and a half last year, which since he became a full-time player is, again, COVID year aside, the second worst of his career since he became third worst of
Yeah,
his career since he became a full-time player. He was in his offensive WAR in 2018, which was his first full season, was a negative 4.5. He was a 27 in 2019, 26 in 2021, a 26.9 in 2022, and last year was a 15 and a half. So I don't know what the trend is. But he's a 6.6 offensive WAR at this point. And so, but I mean, some of the numbers have been pretty good. His K rate is a little elevated, but his walk rate right now is trending to be a career high at 12.8%.
yeah, it's a big thing that I've noticed with him is, and it's usually those things don't correlate, parallel with each other, but they seemingly are right now. So I think they might be balancing out. Oh, excuse me, a little bit more than throughout the season as the season goes on. But again, for him, like it's even last year, I felt like he was a little bit down with his bat overall. But if he can be
Yeah.
what he is offensively, what in a general sense of what we expect to just be serviceable defensively, he'll be worth his money. His bat
Yes.
is a very, very legit number two, number three, number four, whatever, however you want to slot him in those three spots, bat in the major leagues. And it's not just like a legit, he is a good top 20 to 30 bat in baseball when he's healthy and hitting the ball. He's a guy that will bat, high twos, 280s and hit 30 to 35 dingers in 100 and something RBIs. Like he's a guy that you anchor in the middle of your lineup. So again, if he could just be serviceable defensively, um, that's he'll be well worth his contract. In terms of, I know you mentioned it a few minutes ago, expectations of what the team off in the outfield will be long term. I wouldn't really exactly quote me on it, but through the grapevine, I've heard that they genuinely love Willie Abreu as a player, as a person, as a leader on the ball club. Um, does that mean he's locked in here long term? No, because like like we've talked about, they just extended Rafaela. Unless like the golden trade comes available, I don't see them moving Roman Anthony. So that could conceivably leaves one spot, and that's a battle between Durant and Willier Abreu. I'm not sure how you keep all four if Roman Anthony becomes a full time player, but at this moment, I would predict that they do trade Jaren Duran before they trade Willier Abreu.
Okay.
And it's more just because I mean, yeah, a little bit of what I've kind of heard through the grapevine about how they feel about Abreu as a person and as a player. But he also does have a little bit more control. I think he has 2 extra years of control than Jaren Duran, which plays a minor factor in all this. And in just the general sense of how I think that they're gonna have to trade one of them. I kind of unless they trade Roman Anthony, which is possible, they're gonna have to trade one of them. And at this point, I would just kind of expect it to be Duran, but at the same time, and I want to make this notable, Jaren Duran has been great defensively this year, and that needs to be something that's noted. Last time I checked his OAA, it was like 90 something percentile on Baseball Savant. He has been great defensively, and it's been the most impressive aspect of his game this year. I think we were kind of wary of if his bat would continue this year, a little bit, mildly wary, and it has. He's still been pretty good offensively, but defensively he has been good. Like maybe not. His numbers are probably a little bit inflated, but overall he's been good defensively, and he's been in center field a lot lately. Obviously with Rafael at short now, and what are your thoughts on that? Like he seems to be finally. I would say what we've seen in the last 6 weeks is like could be finally the complete version of what we kind of hope and expected Jaren Duran to be.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly taking advantage of the opportunity with Rafaela being moved to short. So, it's good for him to certainly showcase what he can do. And then, then the rest of us have a decision to make. It's a crowded outfield as it is right now. So when Story comes back healthy, whether it's by some miracle sometime this year, obviously it looks like it's going to be next year, but they've certainly got some questions they have to answer. So Yoshida doesn't seem to really have a spot defensively anymore. He kind of seems to be pegged in as your permanent DH. That can change. But I think that, if nothing else, it allows them to, it might make their decision easier. It could make it tougher because obviously if both Abreu and Duran continue to mature and improve offensively and defensively, then, it's not like one of those guys can just be a fourth outfielder that plugs and plays, 30 to 40% of games. That you can't do that if they're that good. So I think it's a good problem to have if you've got too many good players because you can move a good player for a good player in another area of need. So I think you might be right. I think Duran, might be the kind of the outside guy looking in, and he might see the writing on the wall as an opportunity to take advantage of the situation he's got, and then maybe he knows that he's kind of best suited in another uniform, just because the Red Sox don't feel that they've got a full-time spot carved out for him based on how the roster structure is. Certainly not a bad thing. I love what I'm seeing. I was pretty critical of Duran. I mean, he's not a center fielder. He's not a true center fielder in my opinion. But he certainly is starting to put it together. He said he was going to be faster. I don't know if he is or not. I don't know how that's even possible. But obviously he's got, I would say he's he's not going to hit for a ton of power, but decent average, good contact guy, exceptional speed, good defense. That's a guy that will find a home in baseball somewhere if the Red Sox decide that it's not going to be in Boston. So, take advantage of the opportunities. I love what he's bringing to the table. And it certainly allows them to have more options at the table in terms of what they want to do structurally next season. If they really that high on, Willie or Abreu, then, maybe Duran's on the outside looking in, but, he's not going to do himself any favors if he doesn't continue to take advantage of opportunities.
Yeah, it's tough to project at this point. Yoshida seems to conceivably not have any spot on this team long term, and I think it has a little bit less to do. I'm still kind of a believer in the player, like in his bat in general sense, but with his limitations defensively and just having better options long term, financially and control wise, I don't really see a spot for him long term. And so you're going to be looking into this offseason probably where they're going to have to try to trade him, and they're probably going to have to, unless he has a strong second half, eat a little bit of his contract, which again, like, isn't the biggest deal. If you have he's making, I want to say it's 15 a year on the salary cap.
Yep.
You might have to eat 5 of that, which, like, again, it's not great, but you would still be saving 10 million a year.
Right.
But how the roster projects, they're going to need some right-handed bats. They're loaded offensively with the left-handed guys, whether it's Casas, Abreu, Duran, Roman Anthony, Marcelo, Tail.
Is Marcelo lefty or switch hitter?
He's a lefty.
Okay.
So they're just like, they're overwhelmed. Even with Yoshida off the board, they're overwhelmed.
They're still lefty heavy.
Yeah, which, in a big picture, you rather be lefty heavy than righty heavy, because just statistically there are more righties than lefties in baseball. But they're gonna have to make some decisions where, like, your core lineup can't have 7 lefties or 8 lefties.
Yeah,
they're gonna have to make some.
Yeah, they're gonna have to figure something out.
And so, like, we'll see the long-term projection of Ref Snyder, and Ref Snyder is kind of that perfect right-handed bat that you can plug in versus lefties, and we'll see what he can be in the long term for them. I don't think he's under contract for this year, beyond this year, but
the other thing you got to consider is he's also 32 years old.
Yeah, in for good reason. They've been kind of taking him year by year, and both times over the last 2 years, and it's a different regime, so you can't count on it again. But both times in the middle of the season over the last 2 years, they've extended Ref Snyder 1 year.
Yeah,
and
there's a club option next year for $2 million, and I'm sorry, he's 33. He'll be 34 next season.
Yeah, and he's not a full-time guy, but
No.
Ref Snyder is that really perfect bench player, and the guy that can come in and he just mashes versus lefties. He's not a huge guy that will hit 30 dongs, but
no,
the dude bats like 300 versus lefties. And so again, like, if he's that guy that can supplement the left-handed lineup versus when lefties are on the board, on the mound, then so be it. But as a whole, they're still going to have to make some type of decision in the long term, and not to go. We kind of got off a little bit off topic of what we expect of this team this year. I'm still, and you almost seem a little bit more optimistic than me of how things have turned out over the last month, which is shocking for you to be more optimistic. Is I'm like still waiting, and this is just I guess maybe PTSD of the last few years, just waiting for the team to implode. Not that they've been like, it's not even like they're like 28-16. They're 22-21. I'm just waiting for this team to implode, mostly in the rotation. But if they're starting to get to that point where I'm like, all right, like, maybe this team is actually legit, into the sense that they're just like a competitive baseball team.
Yeah, and I think, like, my expectations at this point, because I expect I'm not going to say that and I said this earlier, I'm not going to expect the rotation to keep this up, but I think and this is going to sound really weird, so bear with me as I get these words out of my head. But I think that you'll see a bigger jump in offense than you will see a drop off in pitching. Does that make sense? Like the pitching's overachieving, and I think the
Yeah, I
offense
mean,
hasn't really come around to what I think we
we
expect it to
talked.
be.
That's what I mentioned. I think that things could balance. Will slowly shift it in a little bit more of a balance as the year goes on.
Yeah, but I think that based on where they are and where I think they can be and they should be, and they'll get to, but I mean, at this point, based on what we've seen, like I would say that if they're not knocking on the door of a playoff spot, and I'm not saying like last year was different. So like last year they were in the hunt and then they kind of fell off in September. But I would say if the Sox are not knocking on the door of a playoff spot, you know, deep into the season, not that August isn't deep, but I'm talking, second, third week of September, they're still knocking on the door and it's coming down to the wire. Like that's kind of my expectation at this point is that, unless the pitching completely falls off the wagon, which, a couple injuries here and there could happen. Breaking ball heavy, who knows? I mean, obviously Pavetta was hurt early, Bayo was hurt early, although that was a shoulder, not an elbow. Breaking ball puts a lot of torque on the arm. So if guys start to kind of, whether they fatigue at the end of the year, we have more injuries. I don't really think the pitching staff is going to disappear altogether. But I mean, if they're not at least threatening for a playoff spot, I would be genuinely surprised. I can't necessarily call it like a failed season because they're not building this team to win now. But if they could be knocking on a playoff spot, if they can get into the playoffs, maybe win one of those first round series, because it's a 3-game series, right? Anything can happen in a 3-game series. I don't think, it's, even in somebody's wildest dreams, I don't think expecting them to do anything beyond a first round playoff win is a realistic expectation of this team. But I would expect them to be, at or above where they were last year. And, but again, if they're not knocking on the door of the playoffs, I wouldn't call it a failure because they weren't trying to be a playoff team. They were just trying to be competitive and have meaningful games in September and then see where the season took them, see where the chips fell and where they were, in the end of the summer and in the early part of the fall. But I would expect the offense to turn it around. The pitching staff might come back down to earth a little bit, but I kind of, based on where they're going, like I kind of expect them to be like an 84-ish win team.
Yeah, I mean they're currently on track. If you kind of times this by 4, they're essentially a fourth of the way through the season that they would be an 84 win team basically. They're 22 and 21, so they're just a touch over a fourth of the way through the season. They'd be right around that 83 to 84 win team, and if that's where they are, come August, then they're probably within, if not, if they don't have a playoff spot, then they're probably within a game or 2 or maybe 3 max of that playoff spot. Which goes back to like what we expect for them to do at the trade deadline, and we don't have to go around in circles on that.
Yeah.
But like you said, we went into the season with you even had lower expectations than me, but even for myself, I felt like there'll be a low 80, high 70 win team, and they'll be mildly competitive, but it like just overwhelm my overall I didn't expect a ton. I would say that they're a little bit exceeding my expectations by a touch. And ironically, it's in the complete opposite way of, I think, what everybody expected. So, we'll see how things kind of play out over the next few months. But as a whole, I mean, I guess I'm excited that the pitching staff has been improved. Whitlock is returning. It should be this week. Hauk looks exactly what we all had hoped he could be. Bella looks pretty good, though he was a little bit injured. Pivetta, we'll see what he is long term. He's due for a new deal after the end of this year. But if Bailey sticks around long term, and we can get into the whole Cora, is he going to be here long term or all that type of situation. But if this is what Bailey can bring to the table, the timeline of competitiveness jumps up a year, in my opinion. I think
Yeah.
that they could be very legit contenders next year if these one or two of these young guys get into the mix, at the end of this year or maybe early next year, and they can go into next season where you say they may not have a dominant bullpen on paper, but they're going to be a solid or good rotation because of their pitching coach in the system. And then if the batting lineup can take that next step forward, whether it's with the young guys or they add a guy or two in free agency, and you kind of looked at this and said, maybe they'll be competitive in 2025, but really 26 and beyond was the focus point. Now it becomes 2025 and beyond, in my opinion.
Yeah, and depending on when they come up, I would say mid 25 at the earliest is when I think that they could really turn it around. And that's just being realistic. Could Roman Anthony and Marcelo Mayer make those leaps where, maybe they get a little bit of taste of Major League ball at the end of this year, and then they can hit the ground running in the spring of 2025, and they're just, they're ahead of the game and they're good right out of the gate? Sure. I just don't, I wouldn't hang my hat on that. It's just not really, it's not really how it works. It has happened, right? There's examples of guys that you get lightning in a bottle. What was it? 2017, 2018, Gary Sanchez had 33 home runs in 60 games when he came up at midway for the Yankees. You've seen things like that. It's an unrealistic thing to expect. But I think that, if they can hit the ground running, maybe mid 2025, everything kind of comes together and they make a second half run next year. If these guys are, where they're supposed to be at that point in the year, if this continues, I think that that's not out of the realm of possibility, but who knows?
Yeah. We'll see how things play out, but for now, that's kind of where we'll wrap it up for this week. JR will hopefully be back within the next week or two. He's got a bit of a lopsided schedule right now that things are disrupting him, but this was a good talk. Obviously, the Celtics will, by this time next week, we'll know who they're playing in this series. Will possibly have started. The Bruins play tomorrow night, Game 6.
Yes.
I think we're both kind of
big Game
yeah.
6
I mean,
tomorrow.
they survived Game 5. Now they're at home and it's in front of them. They're not that they've been good at home this year in the playoffs or anything like that, but they got a home game, Game 6. Marchand's coming back, so it's in front of them. You put it, you win Game 6. It doesn't matter. Clearly, they've won 2 out of 3 in Florida. So,
Yep.
You win Game 6, Game 7 in Florida. It is a crapshoot of what you can expect. It's a toss up. It's a ball game. It's anybody's game in Game 7. So it's win tomorrow night, and we'll see how that works out. Like we just talked about with the Boston Red Sox, and the Patriots are in their kind of a lull. We just saw rookie mini camp, and not a ton of news other than that. Bailey Zappi is continuously not my QB1, and it will always be.
You and probably 94% of all Patriots fans.
I would even say about 98.5%, but that 1.5% is
they're all my
they make themselves heard.
They're all in my fantasy league. Yeah, and what's nice is with the Celtics, I think we're kind of all covert Pacers fans tomorrow night. They are favored at home. They're a 5.5-point favorite at home tomorrow. Would love nothing else than for us to get a repeat of what happened at the conclusion of the first round of the NBA playoffs, where Orlando held serve at home and then Cleveland won it in Game 7. I don't think we really cared who won Game 7, but I think for the sake of maximizing rest days for Porzingis, we wanted the series to go 7. I'm kind of in the same boat. go Pacers tomorrow. Don't really care who wins Game 7. I haven't really dived into matchups to know if I would rather play Indiana or New York. Brunson's been playing out of his mind though, so maybe Indiana's young, maybe be happier with them just because of the the inexperience factor, and nobody really on Indiana. Like nobody on Indiana scares me. Not that Brunson scares me, but I don't think anybody is on the Pacers that's at Brunson's level. So
Halliburton's close, but I would put Brunson above him probably
yeah.
by a touch.
So you know, go go C's, go B's. Big night tomorrow night in the Garden. If you're going, be safe, have fun, and do whatever you can to send the team back down to Florida for Game 7.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. All right, until next week, we'll be back. We'll raise the banner. Thanks for listening.
Have a good night.